Greetings, brothers and sisters. So, I don't know if I'm going to get to other things or just do a voiceover today. There's a few other things I might cover. But these thoughts came to me last night. I wanted to share from a different perspective. There's various levels to any narrative. And there's two spiritual principles, or there's two things that are happening right now that are affecting all of us. The first one was Babaji, the second master of the heartfulness system, when he gave some of these messages from Whispers of the Brighter World. In one of them, he said, when all these upheavals take place, he was talking about big changes coming to planet Earth, some of them, man-made, some of them, acts of God and nature, that when these upheavals take place, we're going from a relatively calm period of time. We've all lived in a time where it's been very calm on planet Earth. And then there'll be a time where it won't be calm, it'll be more tumultuous. And we're heading into that time. And he talked about these upheavals. And he said when the upheavals hit, the innocent will be punished with the guilty. And, there's no way when you're talking about like a volcano or nuclear war or, a nuclear power plant exploding or a solar flare or an EMP and all the things that can bring about chaotic situations when diseases and things like that. As a person that's more connected to God in a deeper way and what he refers to as an innocent person, a person that doesn't have bad intentions, a person that isn't going against the will of God, you might be able to have a more peaceful end to your situation, your life or whatever, peaceful transition, and, might not linger, might not be as bad, but there's no way to protect the people, the good people, from the events that are about to unfold. Like everybody's going to suffer. It's, inevitable. Doesn't matter what kind of person you are, what kind of life you lived. Your reward is when you go to the spiritual world. There's no way to give you material bliss during an apocalypse. It's just not possible. Like some people are going to be in better areas than other people. Maybe you find your way to those areas, whatever it is, right? But there's lots of good people that are going to suffer and, but maybe not so many, right? I mean, let's be honest, but, the innocent will be punished along with the guilty regardless of what your contribution to this mess we're in, that everybody's going to suffer. And I think that's something that, it's not that, you did wrong or whatever. You're just here at this particular time. And, there'll be benefits to the suffering on a spiritual level. There's a reason for the suffering. And so, that's something for everyone to think about. The other piece to this, the more important piece, is that whenever force is used, a counter force is immediately created. So when you push something, there's immediately some pushback, a rebound that comes, back at you. It's like you throw a ball at the ground, right? Like a super ball or a basketball or something, and immediately has a rebound, right? It comes back up at you. The ball bounces back at you. And this is even more true on a spiritual level. Whenever you apply force, then a counter force is created. And in the world of emotion and, politics and, whatever it might be, that counterforce can grow. It's just like creating a lie, and then the lie comes back at you. The lie comes back to haunt you, right? The lie is eventually going to get you. Like the lie, that you created, it might hurt others at first, but it'll eventually come back to you. Master Charji, the third master of the system, said, whenever you have a thought, whether it be a hateful thought or a loving thought, whatever it might be, it will circle around the universe and come back to you. And so, there's like a boomerang effect here and also a counterforce effect here. And so when your system, your government, your leadership, your culture applies force, then eventually that force is going to come back in the form of a counterforce. It's going to rebound and, boomerang and come back and hit the original doers, right? Maybe not in this lifetime, in terms of your physical life, but it's coming back at you. It's just the way it is. And that's why in the heartfulness system, there is no force involved in the purity of the heartfulness system. No force is applied. The transmission that's given, the pranahuti, the utilization of divine energy for the transformation of man, is the essence of love, and it isn't forceful. Love is a power without power. It is a force without force, right? It's an energy without anything behind it, force or power, right? It's energetic in nature, and yet it doesn't apply to these rules because it is the most subtle thing in the universe. There's nothing more subtle than love. There was a time that Master Charji, his Babaji's disciple, was traveling around Europe with him, and they was asked a question like on a radio show, I believe. And the question was, somebody says, what is the best system for spirituality? And Master Charji said he was relishing the answer because, there's always this element that your teacher gets caught in a sort of predicament, a guru in this case, and he can't say my system. Not only does it lack humility, but it's just, there's like etiquette rules and things. So you can't come out and say, the system I'm telling you about is the best system, the system that I'm promoting, basically my system, even though it isn't his system. It's everybody's system. And so he was like waiting for Babaji to answer this question. He can't lie, and he can't, and he can't say his system. And so Babaji gave this brilliant answer where he said, I like the system best that doesn't have any power in it. I think that's almost a exact quote. I'm not sure, but the essence of it is there. He liked the system that doesn't use any power, which of course was his system, the heartfulness system. But he couldn't say that, and even then he found a way to say it without saying it. And what that means to bring people into the heartfulness way, the heartfulness system, is that there's no coercion, there's no hype, there's no this is the greatest system, whatever kind of thing there is. There's no anything like that. And people are free to leave. When people want to leave, there's no manipulation. Hey, if you leave this system, you're going to hell, right? Whatever it is. There's nothing like that. People come and go of their own volition, and it's their experience and their choice. No pressure is applied to get people to come in, and no pressure is applied to stop them from leaving. It should be that way. Occasionally you get, people who do the system that'll, who are just manipulative in nature and will say things like, I gave an example. There was a trainer who told his son, if you don't start heartfulness, you're not my son anymore, which is a horrible thing, right? I didn't like this guy. I mean, and so, there's things like that right out there. People who are doing the system are not, understanding what the system's about, the essence of the system. Like there isn't anything worse you could do to, in terms of a system that doesn't use force and to be that manipulative with his son. So, people are stupid and, they do things like that. But in terms of the, essence of the system and how the way it's, supposed to be applied and the way that it is being generated from the master, that people aren't forced. Maybe circumstances arise in a person's life that creates the opportunity for them to consider doing heartfulness, but they have to choose it. They have to choose it on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. There is no, structure out there to keep you doing something, right? You're free to leave. You're just our Master Charji. He had some, moments where he like quit, right? Or, he was bummed, before, that he had some issue with Babaji or whatever, and he just, quit for a little bit and, came back or whatever it is. And so these things are, it is a system that is forceless, the forceless force. It uses no force. There is energy in it that has no power. And so this is, one of the beautiful things about the heartfulness meditation. And therefore there's no counterforce. There is, there's nothing to, to grab onto to come after the system, right, to create a counter movement because no force is used. And so no counterforce is, available. There's no negative. There's no, in a sense, devil in the system. There's only, the forceless force that keeps on moving and creating, and the divine energy, the essence of love, pranahuti it's called. The transmission that's given when you said meditation, there's this energy that comes to you, loving energy, and there's no, there's nothing that comes with it. I talked about two sides of the coin. We did a video yesterday or a couple of days ago, abundance and deprivation, pleasure and pain, whatever it might be. Love doesn't have something like that. Love has no opposite. So, you receive love and there's nothing that comes with it. You put out love to the universe and then nothing comes back. Like nothing, you grab, you have abundance and eventually you're going to have deprivation. You have pleasure, eventually you're going to have pain. But love has no opposite. So when you have just love, then there's nothing coming back at you. You're putting out love, and only love can come back. There's no counterforce. And so this is something for everyone to understand. Living a more subtle life, right? Living a life without, creating, a backlash, creating pushback. And so what you see with many religions, all religions, and, most spiritual organizations, is that they find ways to force people to do something, to join their organization, to stay in their organization, to give money, whatever it is. They use tactics, manipulative tactics, sales tactics, right? Somebody reading from a script, like you go to buy a car, and the salesman has a script to read from, right? And it, is forcing you in some way, coercing you into buying a car. Now, you can still choose out. You're making your own choice, right? But the scripts, the sales scripts, make it highly likely, more likely, that you'll purchase a car or you'll do whatever, right? It's just something that, there's an advantage to it. When somebody's reading from a script and you're just winging it, you're coming in, they have training, right? They have training how to get over objections. And, there's just a form of almost like hypnosis where salespeople are able to, bend you to their will using whatever tactics, and advertising and all these things to create your desire to purchase something. And so, we've all been in situations where somebody else manipulates us or coerces us into making a decision that is better for them and worse for us, right? And, we end up ultimately making the choice. I mean, there's responsibility there. Or, even in terms of a governmental system, a cultural system, where we have to go along with things all the time that we don't want to. Think about all the times you have to lie, or just misrepresent yourself and pretend to go along with something. Maybe you just hold your tongue because the societal pressures or your pressures at your job or whatever it might be are forcing you to not speak your truth, not to, like some, Britney Spears conservatorship kind of thing, right? Where you're supposed to go along with something that you don't, believe is right. I mean, that happens to everybody on a daily basis. And then in relationships where, the people in your life control you in some ways, you can't say certain things because of their reaction. And it's, manipulation and coercion at the center of it. And these are all forceful things. I've talked about when people say, oh, I'm unsubscribing because I, said something about their belief system. Like that is a coercive act from the person saying, I'm unsubscribing. Like they could just leave, but they want to, and there's times people say, oh, you're going to lose a lot of subscribers over this. You said something that I don't want to hear. And so, I, made a decision early on, and I didn't really care in the beginning, that subscribers or, people leaving or people turning on me or any of these things wouldn't affect my behavior. I wouldn't, withhold the truth or what I believe to be the truth, the information that was coming through me. If I knew it was going to affect people, there'd be a, reaction from people hearing it. I wouldn't pander to my audience, one segment, one demographic here, because there's all these various demographics that come to listen to me here. But in terms of if, God wanted me to say something or show me something, There's I can't even explain. Well, I guess I could explain. It's not really rocket science, but, things will come up and it will lead in a video. Like I'll talk about something in a video and it will lead to future insight because people will leave comments and there'll be questions. I mean, even if I don't read the comment, people will have questions or they'll have reactions and I'll pick up on it one way or another. There'll need to be a response, right? There's, the whatever it is, the message isn't complete. The message that I started off with isn't complete. You see this on various, subject matters. It happened with Michael Jackson. And I got all these comments, people saying, "Oh, you're obsessed with Michael Jackson," because I made whatever videos. They're no longer here because YouTube changed its whatever it is, its view of those things. But I made, I don't know, 12 or 14 videos on Michael Jackson, but they weren't about Michael Jackson at all. They were about that issue and what he was and the way people reacted as fans and all these things. And so people don't understand that. Like what's happening with Britney Spears, there's a movement there. The conservatorship, the control of another person, psychiatric holds. It's not really about Britney at all. I mean, it's something where, people are interested in Britney, but it can be used as a deeper way of teaching divine principles and pointing out some of the hypocrisy and the negativity of our system. And so oftentimes my videos aren't about, whatever the apparent subject matter is. It's a way of, bringing about these revelatory type of teachings, that come from the, dynamic effect of being connected to the source through the heartfulness system, having a connection to divinity within you, and then God shows you things, and God, gives you information. And since I'm in this position of sharing with other people, learning to honor that information, right, regardless how it affects the listeners, whether they like it or not, because of their rigidity of their belief system. And that's why I end up doing comment videos and things to talk about that aspect. Because people, like I'm I'm counting like the numbers, right? I got so many subscribers. I got, like that's the point of this channel, right? I follow a path. Like I've followed a path all along. Sometimes I have to do things I don't want to do, like covering celebrity topics and things. I got a comment. I didn't save the comment, but a person basically said that I could give my spiritual videos without any, talking about celebrity culture and, whatever, politics and all these things, right? And the person said, the only reason you have to do that is for your pockets, right? So that for monetary compensation. Well, this is a job, right? I'm not doing this for free. Like it's not, I'm not diving into the world of Britney Spears. And like I said before, I don't make Cardi B videos for free, right? Like, it's not something I do it's not a hobby and not a spare, in terms of a spare, things I do in my spare time. But also there'd be nobody listening to. I mean, it'd be a very small amount of people that would listen to just the spiritual principles. And those things are hard to digest and understand if you don't have some sort of context to them. And people are concerned about the world the way it is. And many of them are completely obsessed with, pop culture, politics, or whatever it might be. And so weaving those things into a video format is a generous act on my part for the audience that's there. I mean, it's not a generous act in the sense that I'm doing it for other people. I'm doing it because God wants me to do it. But I didn't originally want to do it. Like I just was, I talked about that story. I'm not going to go into it here. But it's just a lack of understanding, right? Where there should be appreciation, there's criticism. And that's how people are. And so I've learned that over the years. That I don't care. Even the people who've been here a long time, viewers who have been here a long time, they may turn on you, right? I mean, it's just how it is. People will, there's times you're a mentor to people or teacher to people, and then some reason they turn on you. I've seen it happen over and over in the heartfulness system, people turning on the master of the system. They love the master of the system, and then something happens, and then they, turn into a hater, right? I mean, you see this, of course, in the Christian tradition with Jesus and his disciples, 3 out of 12, right? What is that? 25%. One had a moment of doubt, one had a moment of denial, one had a moment of betrayal. And so this is, if you do things for your audience, you do it for the people that are benefiting from whatever you're presenting, you're going to end up bummed out. But if you do it for God, then there's no question about it. There's no, you're not, performing a service for other people that you can feel resentful for, that you can feel upset about. That's why I can read the comments and not get upset, devastated, right? Because that's how it would be, the ingratitude. And I'm talking about people who present information on social media or whatever, leaders, politicians, and anybody, a saint, spiritual master. When you start working for your audience, ultimately your audience is going to turn on you. It just can be a few people, right? Hurt your feelings. You can have still lots of people that love you, but you'll end up focusing on the ones that are ungrateful, and then you'll become resentful and hateful and spiteful. But if you remember you're working for God, then the negative feedback just flows right through you. And so, I had this, I made a couple of videos, a couple of days ago on John 3:16 and King James. I talked about King James, the guy who wrote the King James Bible. And there was force used by King James. See, a lot of you guys, all of us right now, are experiencing force. Our government, our social system is forcing things on us that we believe to be, well, for a lack of a better term, like satanic, going against the divine laws, right, which our whole system does, and things that go against our belief system, and they're jamming them down our throats. That we're supposed to go along with these things. We're supposed to suppress our feelings about it and not push back based in the systemic force. And people don't like it, right? Like people are getting, feel like they're being forced to get, Voldemorted, right? There's, all these things, cultural things and social things, and you see it on a daily basis. And your young people are indoctrinated with this, and they believe it. Many of your kids believe in these things. Many of your kids' friends believe in these things that are, embracing them, and it feels completely forced. And you're like, wow, this sucks, right? It sucks to have the powers that be force something that I don't agree with and don't believe in. But to understand this idea that, like for just example, Christians, this can be, applied to any religion. There's a great quote I saw on Facebook. Somebody posted, one of my friends on Facebook who does the Heartfulness System, that Babaji once said, God does not have a religion, and religion has no God, right? And that's a, profound statement, because what it means is that God doesn't pick one religion over another. There isn't a chosen religion of God. Religions are constructs of man. Religions are constructs of controlling people through their pursuit of the divine. That people have realized, demonic people, negative people, have realized that people, whatever need or craving people have to connect to God, that it can be, monetized and, used as a power broker. You can use this, people's not desire, but need, like craving inside them to connect to God, and use it as a way to control them and get their support. And that you can harness that power, religious power. And so these people have realized that they can twist teachings, valid teachings, good teachings, and the spiritual essence of something, and turn it into something that is, materialistic. They can act as a broker and a middleman between you and God. And so God doesn't choose, any of these, one religion over another, because, they don't represent him. You can't trademark God. You can't, act as I got, exclusive rights on God. Look at me. I'm the only one who has this. I got a deal. That's what religions say. And that's, John 3:16. And so, it is blasphemous. But also, religions don't have God because they're about power and they become political. Some of them have armies. All these things, right? And so this is a very profound statement, very simple, right? God does not have a religion, and religion has no God. And so it's something for everyone to consider. This happens with all religions. The way it happened with Christianity, and let's talk about King James. King James became an ardent Christian, and maybe, he was a true believer. And he had people, pagans, who didn't want to convert. They were the make America, they were make England great again people, right? They didn't want Christian, they didn't want this new belief system. Like, many of you feel about the religion of science. The religion of science is demeaning and overtaking, especially with youthful people, your Christian, religion. And the religions or whatever it is, people's belief in God. That the religion of science is now being pushed out there, and people are leaving the other religions and becoming, agnostic and atheistic and believing just in the religion of science. The religion of science is being pushed. This COVID movement, right? This COVID Operation COVID. Remember, I said this maybe last April, over a year ago, when they said you couldn't go to churches. Maybe it was in June, I don't know. When they said that people couldn't go to churches anymore because churches wouldn't keep you safe from the spread of COVID. Science was overruling your desire to go to church or synagogue or an ashram or whatever it is. They were saying you can go to your place of worship as long as science says it's okay, because science is real and your religion can't keep you safe. God can't keep you safe. Prayer can't keep you safe. None of these things can. But science can. Science knows better. You can do your religion. You can practice your stupid religion, as long as science says it's okay, because science is real and your religion isn't. God is not real, science is. And so this is something that many of you experience, right? Being, having this forced upon you, a new belief system. And so King James took it way farther than what you're experiencing. All these things that you're experiencing being forced to accept. King James said, all right, well, I'm going to persecute particularly women who don't, because women, you always have to get the women, right? And so women, pagan women who don't accept, Jesus, don't, become Christian, they're going to be burned as witches. And so that, burned them alive, strangled them. There was some debate about that. I talked about that in another video. But when you burn people, like, how bad it smells if your hair burns a little bit when you get too close to the stove or something, you have a gas stove or, whatever it is, you have fire, or you burn yourself. And the smell of burnt flesh is just disgusting, right? It's one of the worst kind of smells. And they were like just burning people like that, right? No sense of, just, horrific things, right? Things out of a horror movie. And he didn't have Jesus's permission for this. Certainly Jesus wouldn't have approved of this. You understand? This is the guy who wrote the King James Bible. And, these behaviors by Christian leaders. And so we're talking about the Crusades. We're talking about going to countries like America. And because of John 3:16, this idea that everybody else is going to hell. That if you haven't accepted Jesus, you're going to hell. So you had missionaries and people forcing Aboriginal people in America and these other countries to adopt this religion, forcing them through military force, right? Because the English and the Europeans had developed military weapons, guns, and military strategies that were far superior to other, groups, other armies, whether it be people in Africa or people in America or people in Ireland or Scotland, right? These various conquered countries. Another thing was, I read this very, compelling article about, because I have, I'm part Irish, how these, these Irish kids were going to Christian schools and they had their own belief systems and things. And they were beaten severely and punished for speaking Gaelic, their native language. How they, made these kids speak English like they did in America with the native peoples or whatever it was, the slaves that they took. And so because of this John 3:16 belief that everybody else is, going to hell, that you had to save them, that using force was okay. Using whatever methods at your disposal, intimidating people, burning them at the stake, whatever it might be, sending armies into their country and forcing them to convert to your religion. And just a lot of force, right? There was these, they found all these native kids, kids in Canada. This was years ago, but they had found this mass grave, I believe it was a Catholic school. And they found that they just, like an orphanage, and they just killed all these native kids. They just buried them, like, I mean, the slaughter. And then I guess the Queen was somehow involved in that. I don't remember what it was. I've done videos on these things. But horrific acts were created based in this idea of forcing people to adopt a religion, to adopt a culture, the colonization process. This really happened, right? Slavery really happened. I mean, these are historical, this has been documented historically by the oppressors. Like I've talked about how there's different versions to the story of the oppressor and the story of the oppressed. Like in a divorce situation, the husband has their side of the story, subjective. The wife has their subjective side of the story. And their kids have all limited subjective sides of the story. And you have kids going on either side if it's a really bad divorce, right? And nobody really knows what the story is. And if it's a celebrity couple like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, the celebrity, news, the paparazzi, they'll cover it and they'll give their opinions. And then, everyone else will form an opinion of what really happened in the marriage, right? And then, one narrative will sort of win out, right? Maybe it's a combination of the various people's stories and whatever it is. But in an oppressor versus, a victim, the oppressor, like if a country conquers another country, the conqueror gets to write the story, gets to write history. And so in America and Europe, the, King James was going to get a good story, a favorable story for him, right? That's how I know that these things are true, because what he really did, and we know this about the royal family, I mean, they were cannibals for God's sakes, just 300 years ago. You think about all the things the royal family did, all the abuse and exploitation they participated in. But the royal family has a favorable, narrative, even though, they tell some truths about what they did in England and, the Queen and their various ancestors. They still have a much more favorable story and narrative than it really was, right? They don't get the point of view from the oppressed. And so force was used. And so you Christians got to realize that, that force was used. And even in your family, who knows, like when Christianity was forced on you, all the slaves, all the native peoples that become Christians, right? That maybe grow up in a Christian household. But at some point, Christianity was forced on their ancestors that didn't want to take it, didn't want to believe in it. But it was forced on them, as was the culture, as was the American language. The English, the English language, right? It was forced on the people who were oppressed, right? They had to learn to speak English. They had to adopt that as their primary means of communication, and they had to, adhere to, using knives and forks and whatever. Some of the things were good, some of the things maybe not so much, but they had to adhere to the cultural and social pressures of the oppressor and the oppressor's culture. The kind of clothes you wore, all these things, the manners, the way that you expressed yourself. These were all forced on people through military superiority, right? And so, the idea was that God, this idea of manifest destiny, that God must have given the European people, British particularly, but France, and Spain and these other countries, given them superior military capabilities, better ships, better guns, better strategies, and because they had material superiority, they could subjugate these people because it was God's will. And that is, there's a little bit of truth in it, but it's not, it didn't give the kind of permissions and liberties. There was a reason why the people in Europe, a divine reason, were sent out because of divine, there's divine reasons behind everything, a part of a plan, that they were sent out to bring the world together. They had an ambition, they needed ambition to do that because it was dangerous. Many of those ships, it's sailing across the Atlantic Ocean like it's crazy, think about that, There's a book and a movie about this, that there was these, I think they were like monks or bishops or something that built from Ireland. They built a boat out of like cow skins, right? And they sailed across the ocean and reached America like before Columbus, and there was this legend about it. And so this guy who does these things, there's some guy who, he does these types of adventures, and he tries to recreate these. I wish I could remember the name of it. If somebody, one person probably knows what I'm talking about, not everybody, remembers what I'm talking about. And so he redid it. He got this crew, and they built a boat. They figured out how to treat these cowhides, and they sailed across the ocean and made it to America. Documented it in video, showing it could be done. That this legend was very possible and even highly likely. And so there was this, ability to sail across the Atlantic Ocean, but nobody would, I mean, it's just risky, these things, right? The ocean is a brutal place, especially back then. So they needed ambition. They needed a reason. And so they had their, ambition, the Europeans, and they, created a world where everything is connected. The British government, it's, positive. The Queen and, her ancestors, they created a connectivity by colonization, but it didn't have to be as brutal as it was, right? Master Chargy said it wasn't, that wasn't a historical necessity. So they went over the top, right? They forced their culture, and they did things that they took liberties with the power they had. They had power of superior military force, superior, naval capabilities, superior, military culture. And so they went to these places where people were living, in many cases, primitive type of situations. But these primitive peoples also had value. They also had things to teach and include in a global culture. One of the things Master Chargy talked about when he came to America is that, you have this melting pot of cultures from all over the world. And he said the possibility was there that America could have taken what was best from all of its immigrants, all of them contributing something higher from their, from their culture. But he said, unfortunately, it took the lower, that the lower from all these blended cultures from all around the world has created the sort of hedonism and, a lot of the negativity that exists in America. Instead of rising up to the higher nature, it is, has gone down to the lower level, which is a problem with human beings. But going back to this essential point, King James is being an example, but there's many more examples of Christian leaders. I just figured out what this sound was. I'll get back to the point, but that background sound, which comes from my handheld mic, is my hand gets tired. I'm holding the mic. In this case, it's 40 minutes. But I've eaten breakfast, not 40 minutes straight, but eventually the base of the mic rests against my chest or my belly, depending on how I am sitting. And because of my breathing back and forth, the movement against the mic creates that sound. So now I know what to do about it. I just got to remember not to allow. Anyways, going back to my essential point here. Christian leaders use force to make people become Christians. And that's, again, I'm singling that out because that's America and something we all deal with. But it's, all these religions and cultures. And now they're doing it with science. And many of you are unhappy with this. But there is a counterforce, right? There is an inevitable counterforce that comes back at an organization or a movement. And so the religions around the world, all of them, who have, forced their belief through coercion or manipulation. And that's one of the reasons why people are rebelling against God, many of them becoming atheists and things, because a counterforce was there. A counterforce. Many of you are upset by the critical race theory, which is also BS, which is also being forced, and there's going to be a counterforce to that. I don't agree with the critical race theory. I don't know that much about it, but I understand it coming from this left version of whatever it is, right? But all of us were given a faulty history. We were told that our founding fathers were just, they got such a wonderful narrative, such a, such a great storyline for them. But they were slave holders, right? Many of them were Freemasons, which, they didn't, talk about that much, right? They barely mentioned it. George Washington, many of them, Thomas Jefferson. If they weren't Freemasons, they were Freemason friendly. They were hanging out with Freemasons, right? Freemasons were very powerful and still are. But more importantly, they were slave owners, and they were, in a way, royal people. They looked at themselves as being better because it wasn't just about slaves. It was indentured servants, right? Who agreed to become slaves for a period of time for passage over to America, or lower level people who were, laborers. And then you had the educated elite, Thomas Jefferson and people like that who were wealthy, who had, they weren't the people that we read about in the history books. Thomas Jefferson was basically, statutory R-ing his slave, Sally Hemings. It was, she was 15 years old, and he was, forcing himself on her. And she had 3 children, and they were his children, and they were his slaves, right? Think about how effed up that is. Thomas Jefferson, wrote some beautiful documents, and he had a, brilliant mind. He wasn't an all bad person, but the kind of narrative he gets, people talk about Jefferson being this great person. And I think they made some kind of a Lifetime series where Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings had some sort of, it was like a romantic Lifetime, kind of movie of their relationship. But it wasn't it was an abusive relationship by every, by every measurement. Like, I worked as a counselor in this, with sexual offenders, right, with sex offenders. And there's ways of understanding abuse. And some of those things are an imbalance of power, and you can't have any more imbalance of power than a slave master and their slave. And also to do with age and experience and knowledge, all of which Thomas Jefferson had more. So it was an abusive relationship on every level. But we were taught that Thomas Jefferson was a hero, and there was these statues of him. And so, that was indoctrination that many people didn't like, right? That was forced on us, forced on our belief system of America. And so you have the other story, the story of the oppressed. And now you have all these Republicans and Make America Great Again people that are upset about critical race theory, this new, level of indoctrination. And what's wrong about critical race theory, and I covered this in a video, because, again, there's multiple narratives of this, is that Native Americans and Africans took slaves. They were slave owners, and the slave trade in Africa, many times the Europeans went to Africa and they were sold slaves by other Africans, like Africans who had enslaved other Africans, sold African people as slaves to Europeans. So you just can't demonize white people, right, and say they're the only bad guys, but white people can't come out and Christians can't come out and, proclaim that they're great and, that their diluted history that they want to believe in about their religion, about their, about their culture is the true version of history. It's the one you want to believe, right? It's the one that you want to think is the, I just thought about the microphone thing again. Like, I was wondering, I got like a sort of a neoprene sleeve to put on the mic, which has been very helpful. It's actually easier for me to hold it. And I thought that was working, but then once in a while, and it was working because I had less tendency to drop the bass of the mic. I don't know why. But anyways, because of confirmation bias, people want to believe that their version of history, and the one that agrees with their belief system, the Make America Great Again people, that again, I saw that woman, Christy Nome, talking about these things. But this liberal movement that's coming out, which is forceful, they're using force, and it sucks. And, I don't like the bad things that I know to be, inaccurate, the religion of science, which I know to be inaccurate, all the stuff that's going on now, all the things They're being forced on all of us in one way or another. And then the belief system changing and the inaccuracies. And again, a counterforce, because it sucks. You know what it feels like to have this stuff forced on you. But you got to realize your original culture was forced on you and your ancestors. Just getting them to move off the farm. I've talked about that before. Getting them to leave the farm and go into the city and, adopt a new language in many cases and all the things that have been forced on people for so many generations. And then a counterforce, there's always going to be a counterforce. And eventually the counterforce is going to become stronger, and the culture that has been infused in you that maybe you're attached to is being taken down. And so, there's a lot more than just social and historical and religious culture that's been forced. It's the way that humanity has forced itself on nature, dominating nature, right? Not working with nature, but just going in there and demolishing it. And so there's that level of force that's going to come back in terms of natural catastrophes. I mean, just all of it. We've been a very forceful, so many generations of human beings have been very forceful, and the counterforce is coming around, which, in this case, on the social level and political level, it's another level of force that there's going to be pushback, right? Like this social system they're pushing, this new social agenda and cultural agenda the left is pushing is going to create backlash and a counterforce and all these other things that they're doing, right? Whenever one political party gets this kind of power, the right had this power for a very long time. The Democrats were always had to be centrist, and even now, the liberals never got very much run, right? They never really had any power, and now they do. And I'm not talking about political power, because political power is almost nothing. I'm talking about media power and the powers that be, the so-called controllers, going 100% behind this agenda and not even acknowledging the right-wing perspective or the truth community perspective, delegitimizing all other perspectives. And this is what happened on a religious basis, and this is what I was talking about with King James. Everyone in the Christian tradition saying this is the way it is, being very forceful, stuff that I've experienced here. And so now you have the opposite. The pendulum has swung, and the powers that be, especially now with social media, all backing this pseudoscience and all backing this, leftist agenda with no real pushback. Religion being denuded, right? There's just no power. There's no solution. There's no counter movement, and they're just steamrolling over everything. Again, they don't get everything that they want. It's going slower than they, there's a lot of failure in what I call the controllers for all of these reasons. And then there's the divine will. But certainly the divine will is here because of the force that was used in the first place to create this one version of pro-patriotic America. We're number one, right? This stuff, we're number one. USA, right? All that kind of stuff, right? What we grew up with in terms of, a very nationalistic, we're great, our religion's great, baseball, apple pie, hot dogs, and Chevrolet, baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, all these types of things. And now the people that didn't buy into that, people who are, angry about the American culture and things, now have the power and now are rewriting history, rewriting the American culture, and just announcing reality like it's fact, that scientists, the science that they're pushing is factual, even though if you look into it, you're like, well, they didn't really use true scientific principles. And then all these other cultural aspects, Trump's a racist, all Trump's supporters are racist, all these things that they're saying are, like they say it on the news like it's a proven fact, right? That there is a difference between January 6th Trump cubies and the Antifa riots, that the Antifa riots were okay, the Trump riots were insurrectionists, right? And they just announce it like that's a fact. And that's what people on the other side, the people who were disenfranchised and weren't accepted by the powers that be. That's the way their reality it was beforehand. And now this is all coming back around. You have to accept and understand that when you use force, you eventually are going to have the force come back at you, There's just one more thing I wanted to add to this. I wanted to include this earlier on in the video. I've heard this from a lot of people, religious people, mostly Christians, obviously, but some other religious people have left comments, and they state things about their spiritual master or their savior, in Jesus's case, that they don't know to be true. And so I want to say this in terms of the things I say about the masters of the heartfulness system. See, people will practice a religion or a spiritual practice, and it will work, and they'll feel God's presence. And it's, a common, when that happens, you go to a religious service or ceremony and you feel God's presence, that you then accept everything that the religion or the spiritual, whatever it is, right, tribal type of thing, some sort of tribal ceremony, and then you think, oh, everything they say is true, that their culture, their dogma, everything is true because I experienced God. And then you start believing things that you have no way of really assessing, especially when they say, all right, the spiritual master of this organization, whether it be Jesus or Krishna or Muhammad or Buddha or, the masters of the heartfulness system, whatever it is, the leaders of the organization, when they say that, when someone says, all right, this is the power, these are some of the things they can do. These are things that they are capable of doing, right? In Jesus' case, walk on water. Krishna had this disc. He picked up a mountain and he had this disc that would, wreak havoc in a war-type situation. We had all these various powers and things like this. And so when you experience some of the spiritual benefits of that religion, you go to a church, you go to a temple, you go to a synagogue, you feel God's presence, and then you say, all right, then everything else they must say is true, but you have no way to evaluate if those, type of things actually occurred, miracles or whatever you want to call them, spiritual powers, and also whether the teachings are 100% correct. And this is, a distinction that people need to understand, because you have no way of evaluating and judging a being on another level. You have to rise up to that level to understand a being and their abilities and what they are and the kind of work they're doing. When we're teenagers, we all start judging our parents more harshly. When you're a young kid, you accept your parents and you look up to your parents. There's a bonding, adoration of your parents when you're a young child and things. But as you get older, you start seeing some of your parents' flaws and you start judging some of their decisions. And maybe you're passing them by. Maybe they've sold out or they've, they're like sort of dead inside. So it's easy for you when you still have life force and you still have passion, you still have dreams. Maybe they've gone to the dark side. And so, you can judge them on that level. But until you become a parent yourself, you don't know all of it, right? You have to rise up to that. You have to, mature up to that level and become a parent yourself to really understand what your parents did and, how hard it was and, all the things that you go through as a parent. That is a whole, it's a whole field of knowledge that you don't understand, right? Like you don't understand because you haven't done it. Maybe if you start babysitting or, you start taking care of younger siblings or something like this, then you start getting a sense of it, and then as you become a parent, you start seeing, your parents' decision through your eyes. And maybe you're like, well, I can't believe how incompetent my parents were. You have these realizations like I had them. Some of the things my parents did that you can't imagine doing as a parent, and you didn't really understand it. So it could be you judge them more harshly or less harshly when you become a parent yourself, right? And so in terms of my experience of the masters of the heartfulness system, well, I knew right off the bat from my first meditations, I went for my initial introductory sittings where I sat across from a preceptor, and the preceptor did some cleaning and then transmitted to me, and I felt the transmission. I, was blown away by it and the experience. And so I knew that the transmission was real. That was a claim by the heartfulness system, right? But if you start the heartfulness system and you don't feel the transmission at first, or you feel it, but it's kind of subtle, it doesn't, you feel it, but you're like, I'm not sure what this is or whatever it is. And so it's a different level of, your ability to judge the system, right? To understand the system. But I can say now, after doing the system for, I think I'm going on my 28th year, coming up in August, my understanding of the transmission and the abilities of the master of the system has grown significantly because of my own spiritual evolution and my experiences. But there are things that are said in the literature. There are, obviously the prophecies I talk about and things like that. And I trust it and believe it because the system has been validated by, my experience and the masters of the system. But some things I know because I've experienced them, and some things I don't know, right? I just believe because of my trust in the system and trust in the master of the system. You understand this? And same thing for everybody else. You have to assess what you actually can see and know, the things that you've experienced, what I really experienced. Well, I prayed, I felt God, when I was praying and I did this prayer from some religion or whatever, I felt God, and then things changed and I knew that God was, I knew it worked. Yeah, so you realize prayer worked. But does that mean that all the teachings of the system, are validated by that experience? No, right? And that's what people don't really understand. You've been indoctrinated by a religion, you've been taught certain things, and you've been told these stories, and some of those things have been changed or embellished, or there are teachings that are left out because the organization, the religious organization, wants to keep people and lure them in and, using heavy-handed tactics and things. And so that's, like I said about John 3:16, you can see the divinity in people that don't do Christianity. You can see their connection to God. You can, feel the godliness in other people that do other religious or spiritual practices. The promises of heaven and hell, or, the threats of hell and the promise of heaven, is something that happens after you die. When one of these, dudes from that other religion are told that they'll get 70 virgins and a mule, right? When they, do something that their religious leaders tell them to do, that's a promise that you don't know is going to happen until after you die. It's going to happen to your soul. Your body's, you're not going to experience it as a human being. But there's things in the heartfulness system you can experience now, and that, mostly the cleaning and the transmission. You can experience the efficacy and judge for yourself to see whether it works or not, and quit or stay based in that. See, in the heartfulness system, the way that the masters make somebody into a preceptor is they do heavy-duty cleaning. Usually the master will give somebody a sitting or two, and then there'll be these senior preceptors who are on a higher level of spiritual evolution, and they have, better preceptor abilities, trainer abilities. And so they'll do deep cleaning on a person. So I was in India, and I just went through my first trip to India, and there was a senior person, and he wanted me to be made a preceptor. I was moving across the country, and, I just felt horrible during the trip, and I never went and approached Master Charji and talked about it because I just felt like crap, like just deep cleaning. And then I was about to leave the country, and he sort of said, "Why are you leaving? You're supposed to be made a preceptor." I was like, I don't know. Like I was kind of nervous, and I just felt horrible. And he was like, and he just paused, and nobody was saying anything. I'm like, I could stay a couple extra days. He's like, sure. Next thing you know, I had a phone in my hand, and like I was, it was this thing, and, I was on the phone. Someone had already dialed the airline, and so I stayed a couple extra days, and I got 3 sittings from Master Charji. I went to his office, I think once, and his house twice. Maybe his office twice, I'm not sure. But the last sitting was in his house. And then I had a series of sittings with senior preceptors, and they were just doing deep cleaning. Like I could feel it, right? And this is something that I experienced. This worked, the system worked. And really deep cleaning. And the whole trip, stuff was coming up. I felt angry and agitated and restless. I mean, internally, I just felt horrible. Couldn't meditate. I got really sick, really, really sick, right? I was there 5 weeks, and I would say 80 to 90% of the time I was just miserable. And so again, the teaching of misery is divine blessings. And then I went to Master Charji's house the last time, and he was doing the final cleaning, and then he was doing something, which I'll talk about in a second, that made me into a trainer or preceptor. And so the first part was I had the worst thoughts. It was like I felt this almost like a, like a tornado or like some really strong wind. It was like, but on an energetic level coming from, behind me and just pulling all this stuff out. Like the will force of Master Chargy pulling whatever, impurities out of my system. And I just felt like, oh my God, he's hearing all these thoughts. I mean, things I would never even think about, like we're just coming out of some past experience or life or whatever, was just flying out of me. And I felt like horrible. I was like, oh my God, he's sitting across from me and our eyes are closed and he's doing this cleaning, right? And then that sort of subsided. And then I just had thoughts about my mom. My mom and I didn't really get along too well. I mean, we weren't close, but she was a good religious lady. She prayed for me and my brother. And I just felt all this, I don't know. I just felt like love for her, whatever it was. And like tears came to my eyes. And then when I got back to America, I didn't tell her any of this, but she, I came back to America. I called her. She goes, oh, I want to start. And there was these preceptors. And I've told some of the story about her, and maybe I'll tell that story again, in this context. But she ended up starting right after that, right? And I didn't say anything about it. I didn't suggest it. I didn't, I wasn't thinking that would happen. I just called her and said, yeah, I had a good trip, and, and I, whatever. And she goes, oh, I want to try it. And I was like, wow. So there was that. And then I just felt this incredible, like just this positive energy. It was just, I mean, the transmission that comes in from the heartfulness system, but this was like something else. It was like the transmission, but it was like happy juice. I just felt happy and just, I didn't, I can't even put it into words because I can't feel it now. Like I have a memory of it, but I can't recreate the feeling I had, but it was just wonderful. And then Master Chargy started to say something, like he was chanting. It sounded like 1,000 voices, like this, he started what was giving me permission to do the sittings, to give these sittings. And it doesn't happen all the time. Like they don't do that anymore. They don't do this sort of, but it was almost like he was chanting. It was in Sanskrit, and it was like magical. And it sounded to me like 1,000 voices, like, like a choir, like a powerful choir. And then he said, that's all. And I was just like in a, altered state, just in this heavenly state. And he said, you want to make prasad, because prasad is something where they offer a sweet to higher developed spiritual beings, God first, and then all these higher developed souls, the liberated souls as they're called. And Lalaji and Babaji, the masters of the system, and now Master Chargy, if Daji was doing it. And they come through the prasad and eat the food on a spiritual level, but they don't eat it because they're not physical, and they leave divine energy in the food. And so we're kneeling together, praying over this food, but I'm just like in another state, right? And so I leave and I talk to this guy from Canada. He was a senior preceptor and he was living in India. And I say, what was that like 1,000 voices thing? And he said, oh yeah, I didn't hear that. Like I didn't have that experience. I said, he goes, he was giving you permission, this is something that but he didn't hear the 1,000 voices thing. And I was like, oh, he goes, you should tell Chargy about it, Master Chargy. Which turned out, I was leaving, I saw Master Chargy and we were talking, I was saying goodbye to him, and I said, when you were giving me that chant, it sounded like 1,000 voices, and he patted me on the shoulder and was like, all right, see you. But then I said, I just felt this sense of happiness. And what this guy explained, in the heartfulness system, there are 13 spiritual points, 4 in the heart, or 5 in the heart, then 5 in the mind, and then 3 in the central region. And the central region is the region where you merge back into the source. So when somebody is made a preceptor, they complete the yatra. Your soul moves from point 1 to point 2, which would normally take 45 years. And so I read this in books, and I was like, all right, that sounds okay. But I didn't have any experience of it. But I had an experience when I was getting these sittings and all the things I was going through. I felt the movement, and then I felt afterwards what it was, right? Because it took some time to digest it and understand. And he says, you're moved from point 1 to point 2, which takes 45 years. And most higher developed souls, most of the people that inspired religions, that's as far as they got. Like, in terms of their efforts, even though they're considered very higher developed souls, that's as far as they got. But then he said, this guy, Don Saverin, said to me, he's since passed away, but he said, and then he puts, energy, he charges the second point so transmission will come through. And that was the energy that I felt. And I, experienced that, right? So he could have been telling me about that. And if I didn't experience it, I'd be like, all right, sounds good. But if I didn't have the experience, I wouldn't, the experience validated the process. And then I gave sittings. I was a preceptor, a trainer for a couple of years, and I gave sittings. I was able to do the cleaning, and and I had experience of doing the sittings. It worked, and so I knew that was true. I knew the yatra part was true. I experienced the yatra. I experienced of other people's internal conditions as I gave them sittings, and the transmission. So that was all validated. The stuff I read in the books, like I believed in it, but I didn't know. Like I believed, but I didn't experience. Like I trusted, but I hadn't, the knowledge of actually seeing it for myself. And so the reason I'm telling this story for this particular video is that there's a couple things here. The first one is it doesn't mean anything to you guys, or, maybe, you identify with me and you trust me and whatever it is, right? But I had that experience, which was more proof for me, more validation of the heartfulness system and it working, and what they say happening, because it happened to me and I experienced it, and then experienced with other people as they were getting sittings. And so for me, it's something. For you, it's, all right, well, that sounds nice, or maybe you believe it or whatever it is, but you still have to have that experience. You have to try it. You have to experience a transmission or not, or the efficacy of the cleaning, and then, have the system prove itself to you, right? So that's one piece to this. The other piece is, if you're a Christian viewer and you really believe in John 3:16, then you have to, interpret my experience, invalidate my experience in some way, in your mind at least, if not say something to me, no, that isn't true, that can't be true, right? Because you believe in John 3:16 and you're not willing to, if you're not willing to be open to the possibility that other systems or other practices outside of accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior can create divinity and a connection to God. If you're not willing to see that as a possibility, then you're going to have to rearrange what you're seeing. When you connect with people, because you can see divinity and feel love from other people. In fact, anybody, when an atheist feels love, that's God. Whether they see it as God or not, doesn't matter. It's still God. And so even somebody who's an atheist, who has moments, if they're a very loving person, has a relationship with God. And even though they're not consciously on an egotistical level believing in God or having a relationship with God, they do. They have a loving relationship. They have a relationship with love, and love is God. So they might not be mentally connected to God or using that particular terminology, but they're connected to God all the same. And so if you can't see that in other people, that causes problems. And when the militaristic European Christians came over to America or invaded other countries, colonized other countries, they could see God. Some of them, or at least all of them on some level, could see and feel God in these other people. But because they believed these people were going to hell and they were uncivilized, they looked down at them, right? It was, you can go back and read the diary entries of Columbus and these various other people, and their view of these savages. I mean, even Benjamin Franklin learned about democracy from some native peoples, and he said, if these savages could do it, we can do it. And so it was invalidating the higher level, the higher nature in some of these people. Yes, they weren't as technologically advanced. Yes, they didn't have maybe the same manners and customs as sophisticated as the people from Europe, but they certainly had their own relationship with God and nature, and they had something to offer the Europeans, just like the Europeans had something to offer the native peoples. But by demonizing them, saying that they're all going to hell because that was the decision, the teaching by the Council of Nicaea, right, to decide to make Jesus the only path towards divinity, the only way to get to the Father through the Son, caused them to abuse and mistreat these peoples under the guise that they were saving them, right? And so it creates problems even here, because I can talk about God and you can feel divine energy and teachings coming through me, but you have to invalidate what you're experiencing because it flies in the face of this belief that there's no other way to connect to God other than through Jesus and really the Christian religion. It isn't about Jesus, it's about the Christian religion. They've created a monopoly on God through the eyes of the Christians that believe if they stray from this path and the organization, they're going to hell, and all the other people who are not connected to the organization or part of the organization are going to hell. It's created great problems. And so I might as well finish up the story with my mom. I've told these before, so I'll do an abridged version. But my mom went to meet Master Charji. He went to see really my brother and I at the ashram in Georgia. She lived in Florida. I believe I was living in New Mexico at the time. And my brother was living at the ashram. He was the caretaker. And my mom and my dad took some sittings, but he saw light and got scared. And my mom started with these 3 really nice Haitian ladies that I see from time to time, really sweet women who are, they're in their, I guess, 60s or 70s now themselves. And my mom, they lived near my mom in Boca Raton, Florida. And so they, were devoted practitioners. My mom started and felt the transmission, and Master Charji was coming out of his, the master's cottage, which is, part of the ashram there. And my brother said, meet me in front of the cottage and you can introduce Mom to Master Charji, which was nice of my brother to arrange. And he had come out and he was, usually pretty gruff with me, or Romano. He was a big guy and he had sort of a presence, right? He was this big guy. Sometimes he had a gruff voice and he could be, sort of gruff and intimidating, but he had a really soft heart. And usually those were my experiences with him. And he came out of his cottage. And I said, Master, this is my mother, Rita Romano. And there was just like sweetness and just this softness in his eyes and just this condition of love, right? Like I was, this divine energy. And my mom looks at him and says, her mom is really soft and she was just spiritual, just like, just had this glow to her. And she said to Master Charji, thank you for this wonderful gift to be able to come to this gathering. And Master Charji said, well, thank you for the wonderful gift of your 2 fine sons. And, it went like a billion times better than I could have ever imagined. Like I was, like moved, right? And there was a young Indian man who lives in Houston who I know more now. And he came up to me maybe 5 or 10 years later and said, I was standing there and I recognized him when Master Charji, blessed your mom. And I said, yeah, I was like, it was a remarkable experience. He said, yeah, it was something like he was just stunned by it himself. I mean, and he said, in the Indian tradition, and the heartfulness system isn't an extension of Hinduism. People think that because it comes from India, and there's a lot of Hindu traditions and teachings that are presented, but also they talk about other traditions from, Sufism and from, Christianity and other things, as well as just ancient fables and things. But it's kind of almost demeaning to say the heartfulness is an extension of Hinduism or some other religion because it stands on its own. It's something, where it starts where religion leaves off. I mean, that's one of the fundamental teachings from Master Babaji in one of his books. But this guy says, in the Indian tradition, the children work for the liberation of their parents. And he said, I felt like he liberated your mom at that point, based in the work that you and your brother would do, which was kind of nice to hear. I don't know that to be true, but it was a significant moment. And so years later, so that was probably 2000, and I would say, actually it was 1998, I'm pretty sure. 1997 maybe? 7 or 8. It was, maybe even 1996. So it was a number of years ago. And then in 2000, and 14 in December 2014, Master Chargy passed away. And my marriage was falling apart. I mean, it had been a disastrous marriage for years, but it really fell apart in November, right before Master Chargy passed away. That whole time, really for a 6-month period, it was just getting worse and worse. Then my son got dengue fever, and he was having convulsions. And I got sick for like 2 months, and I was just like so weak and just, miserable. And then Master Chargy passed away. And then my mom passed away, I believe, in January of 2015, about a month later. And so all these things were significant, right? Big events. And I can't even get into all the details, but it was a very intense time. And so at the time, there was a Latin American gathering going on in the headquarters in Manapakam, India, where people from Latin America were, Spanish-speaking people from Latin America were having a gathering. And one of the places was Haiti. And so these 3 women from Haiti that, they lived in Boca Raton, Florida, were there the very time my mom passed away. And the odds of that is, astronomical, because I don't know how many Latin American gatherings they had there, maybe 2 or 3, and maybe this was the only one, I don't know. And so the odds of that, and then them seeing me at the ashram, I'm walking through the day my mom died, and they're like, we heard about your mom, she was such a sweet lady. And so the people who knew my mom in the heartfulness system were wasn't a lot of people, just people in Florida. She only went to a few gatherings, she was older. She wasn't somebody who met a lot of people and a lot of people knew about her, right? But these Haitian women were the only ones, these heartfulness practitioners from Florida, and they just happened to be in India on the very day I heard about my mom. And I was like, this is not a coincidence. And they just gushed over my mom and how, it was just this wonderful thing. And it just, it happened on a heart level. And I just felt like my mom was taken care of. And then I was walking across the ashram, and I saw Daji. I wrote to him when she passed away. I'm sure my brother wrote as well. And he saw me and he said, I heard about your mom. And he just stared off into space for a little bit and patted me on the shoulder. And then he, walked away, and I just felt, all right, I felt my mom was taken care of. I was just I really can't describe it in words. And there's this one significant story, one more story I want to share about this, because it's important to the context of this video. And so there's a time when I went through something really stressful, and it was sucky on a material level. And I got really sick while I was going through it. And I was fasting, like I couldn't eat. And I was kind of weak and just, overwhelmed and stressed. And I was sort of, on bed rest. And I was in like a really spiritual state. Like at some point, just not eating. And, there's fasting that goes along with, like when I was made a preceptor, I had to fast for 24 hours just so the spiritual energy could take. Because when you fast, I know Daji fasts, I believe, 1 day a week or something like this. So and again, I'm not prescribing fasting or saying any of these things. It's something that, I don't know. I mean, I've done it in the past, and whenever I have, it's, my meditations are really great, but then there's physical weakness, right? And so it's easy to get into a spiritual state, but then, you're not just having the physical strength to, have the energy to do it and things like this, or do other things. But I started to read The Whispers from the Brighter World, and I plunged into the book, and I read it on like a whole different level. Like I was, like just a spiritual level that was so much deeper than when I read the book before. And I understood all kinds of things. I could feel all kinds of things, and I can't even describe it now. Like that's, like I was in this just spiritual state. And because of what was going on and fasting, I was able to plunge into the book, and at such a deep level, I can't even describe it, right? And there's one other story I'm going to tell as well about this. But first, let me finish this one. So I plunged to this, depth, this, a deeper level of spiritual, I don't know what it is, spiritual consciousness, right? And just understanding of the heartfulness system. And then I started eating again, and, I started to feel better and whatever, went through this thing, and the condition disappeared.
And I've experienced this not on this level, but, also at gatherings or during sittings where I don't want it to end because it's like you're in a dream and you're flying and you're like, oh, this isn't a dream and I'm really flying, right? And it feels like you can do it and you're just like amazing and, all those things. You wake up and it's still like tasted almost. It's still there lingering, but you can't do it. It's gone. The dream is gone and you're awake and, you kind of remember it. And then as time goes on, the memory fades and, it's a feeling that goes with the memory and the feeling fades, but you have the memory of it. And so, I've had those experiences in the heartfulness system where a condition opens up or something happens, and it's there, it's in my memory. And and when it happened, it was wonderful or, really a deep feeling, but it dissipates. And, there's times where you're more material, you're more in your material being, you're more in your material body. And there's times where you have, a more open window and the stars align and you can have these experiences. Another thing that happened, there was this teaching in the heartfulness system that at the root of every human's condition is a pain in the heart, a longing, the pain of love, right? The pain of separation from the beloved. When you have somebody you love and they go away and, the separation of love and, the longing and craving to be one with your lover, right? With somebody that you love. Could be a family member or whatever it is, a beloved. And so the teaching in the heartfulness system is that that's just a sort of a copy of the love that everyone has for God. And that deep down you have this longing, your soul has this, this craving, and it's a painful feeling to be one with God, to merge back into the source. And I experienced this in my heart, this deep pain, like for I think it was about 3 months, maybe it was a couple months, I'm not sure, but it was just so painful. But it felt good and real, right? It was this, wonderful experience, but I couldn't function. Like everything else seemed mundane. Like I just had no motivation to do anything. I just had this longing to be with God and merge back in the source. At some point, it had to just be shut off or I wouldn't have been able to function. But it comes up from time to time. And these are just, a few experiences of things that, I can't do them justice in my storytelling because I can't recreate the feeling even in myself. And I certainly can't create the feeling in you as the hearer of the story. And there's, stories from Master Charji, like the time he got a sitting from Babaji and he was surrounded by this like blue light and he felt like wonderful. And he said, he came out of the sitting and he asked Babaji, what was that? And Babaji said, that was eternity. You were, I gave you the condition of, you experienced the condition of eternity. Now that sounds great, but I haven't experienced that, right? Like I believe he did, but I didn't have the experience. I remember it. It's significant to me. It left an impression and something I would like to experience, but you understand this. But when you have these types of experiences personally, and they fade, the memory fades, but, it's there, they're validation of the system. And people who do the heartfulness system, they all have, stories like this if they do it for some period of time. Things, subtle things often. But it's, it's proof to them that the system works and the system delivers and it does what it says it does, right? And, so when I'm talking about the heartfulness system, it comes from that. Of course, the cleaning experience I went through, after that story, I talked about my mom and, my marriage fell apart and, I went for these sittings and all this stuff got cleaned out. I had a resentment towards God and that got cleaned out. I've talked about that in the past. And, the way I felt afterwards, in contrast, right? Like if you eat crappy foods or you're on drugs and alcohol and you go into a detox situation, it feels great, especially those first months when you're exercising and eating healthy and you're getting off the toxins or whatever. But then that becomes normal, right? And so that's the same thing when you're going through a spiritual journey. You'll have you'll crack the code and you'll move up to a new level of spiritual attainment. But after a while, that condition just is normal, and you don't have anything to contrast it with. But I'm saying that there are these experiences that I have, and other people, who do the heartfulness system have had these experiences, and it's something that, more than them just telling you in a book or, giving you a teaching and promising something to you for when you die, you can actually experiencing these things now. and validate your spiritual journey in real time. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Power Motto. Definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.